Welcome back to my 4-part talk on science and media literacy. In this, the final part, I talk about where is media literacy. It's kind of an interesting title. I'm going somewhere with that. Now in the previous talk I I introduced a diagram like this, which presents media literacy as having a practical component, being able to seek information and create media content, and then a more critical component about evaluating messages. And then there are several outcomes of that related to media choice, attitudes and beliefs, and means of expression. Now when it comes to attitudes and beliefs, media literacy can really draw the link between science information and science literacy and how people respond to that. And very often people encounter scientific messages in the media that can ultimately affect their beliefs and their behaviors, and how they come to reflect on that information has a lot to do with, well, certainly their science literacy, but also their media literacy. So the solution, obviously, is to let people rely on their media literacy and help people develop their media literacy skills, right? Simple task. Well, maybe not so simple. Have you heard of this before, the better than average effect? I'm going to go on a little tangent for a moment. And I'm going to do so by stating something obvious. The average person is average. Okay, good. Here's something interesting. The average person thinks they're better than average, at least when they make snap judgments. Now that doesn't quite add up. It's like saying the average of 1 and 1 is 1.4. Doesn't quite add up. Now, one of the great examples of the better than average effect, one of the more interesting examples of it, was shown by a couple of researchers, Kruger and Dunning, who had students at Cornell take a logical reasoning test. There were 20 questions. At the end, these students had to self-assess. So not only how well did they actually do on the test, but how well do they think they did in relation to the average student, and what percentile would they put themselves in. So out of a group of 100 students, for example, the average student would be in the 50th percentile, right? Well, here's what the researchers found. So they grouped the students into quartiles based on their actual performance, and it looked something like this. Those in the bottom quartile obviously had the worst performance. That's how the quartile was defined. Those in the top quartile had the best performance. Then when they were asked to self-assess, well, they didn't put themselves in the 50th percentile on average. They put themselves in the 66th percentile. So they overstated their performance. They thought on average they did better than average. Again, the math doesn't add up there if you think about it. But then what gets really interesting is how the self-assessment breaks down among the 4 quartiles. It looks something like this. And I think what you can see, the pattern here is quite apparent. So those in the lowest 2 quartiles had the greatest exaggeration of their performance. Those in the highest 2 quartiles, on the other hand, were fairly accurate, and they actually underrated themselves slightly. And what this effect showed, and what many other similar studies have shown, is that the worse people perform, the more they overstate their abilities, or the more they overestimate their abilities. And I guess that kind of makes sense. People who lack a particular skill probably also lack the metacognitive skill to think about their level of skill. It's a little convoluted, but I think you get it. So this is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, which was named after the researchers who did some of this preliminary work in identifying and describing this effect. Now, what does this have to do with media literacy? Well, if the solution to getting people to engage on a deeper level with information in the media is to improve their media literacy, how can we do that if maybe people already think they have better than average media literacy? I've actually studied this in my own research. In one study I found that basically people tend to think their media literacy is better than average. Now here again, I'm talking about the average person. The average person thinks they have better than average media literacy. It doesn't quite add up. And this belief is related to other beliefs. For example, the belief that they are less influenced than average by the media. So people, on average, overstate their ability to evaluate media messages, and they understate the influence of media on them. And this is especially the case when people encounter narratives and stories. And this is something I've seen in my other research, where people are especially more influenced than they think they are when they're engaged with persuasive messages contained within a narrative. So people aren't as media literate as they like to think they are. And so if we talk about where is media literacy, well, right now a lot of media literacy is in people's minds, and they're imagining a level of media literacy. There's an important role for media literacy education and getting people of all ages engaged with developing media literacy and being more critical about evaluating claims that they see in the media and developing new skills to seek information and seek scientific information. And so there's a lot of potential for that, but of course that's a story that is beside the point of this lecture. I'd like to actually take this point back to the big depiction of science in society, where science information is filtered through the media to the public. Now, in my earlier lectures on science literacy, I talked about how scientists have science literacy, the public needs science literacy to make sense of science, and people in the media also need science literacy to help convey that knowledge from scientists and make it meaningful to audiences. But media literacy is also important, and to talk about this, I'm going to add another arrow. A lot of modern conceptualizations of science in public thinks about public engagement. The public doesn't just absorb science information, they connect with science information that is relevant, and very often the public benefits from directly engaging with scientists. So certainly the public ought to have media literacy so they can evaluate claims that appear in the media. But scientists also need media literacy so they can produce media content and engage more directly with the public. And so media literacy and science literacy actually exist all throughout this diagram and play critical roles in how public comes to understand and engage with science, with scientists, and through the media. And so that's all I wanted to talk about. Thank you for joining me in this 4-part lecture series. If you're curious about anything I cited in this talk, the links are in the description. Thank you for watching.